Hey, thanks for listening to my podcast. To best enjoy this series, you should start from episode 1 and go on over to brandonheld.com and check out everything my site has to offer. I have the podcast, I have the blog, I offer life coaching, and I even have a little life coaching course if you don't want to talk to me one on one, just to help yourself get started. So start with episode 1, go to brandonheld.com. Thanks for listening. Welcome back, Brandon Held. Life is Crazy, episode 13. So I last left off at leaving Army Food Inspection School and heading to Fort Huachuca. Now, I know you remember much earlier episodes when I talked about my uncle, my 3 alcoholic uncles, who are all passed now, that they told me, everyone to a man, that I should join the Air Force, even though 2 had been in the Army and 1 had been in the Air Force. And I was about to learn the reason why they said that. And so, my time in the Air Force had a bumpy patch, but, all in all, it was a good time. It was a good experience. It helped me grow and mature a lot as a man. It helped me reevaluate some things in life and get a, bigger picture on life and a better point of view on my capabilities and abilities of things I thought I couldn't do before, but I realized I could do, right? Which just opens the door to you realizing, well, let me see what else I'm capable of, and let me see what else I could do. And so joining the Army was that challenge. And also getting a next level degree, a graduate degree, a master's degree, was also part of that next challenge. So I, get to Fort Huachuca, and I get to my unit, and right away, I notice that it's, not as chill and as cool as I thought it would be. The sergeant first class is like having us trying to meet in formations, and there's like 8 of us in the unit, right? And we're mixed with veterinary techs, right? So we're attached to the veterinary unit. We're mixed with veterinary techs. So it's like half food inspectors, half veterinary techs. But the NCOIC, he wanted to, show how big his dick was. And Sergeant First Class Villa, he wanted us to, get in formations and meet like this was the real Army, and we were food inspectors, right? We weren't infantry. We weren't anyone that was ever going to be on the front line. Yeah, if we got attached to some deployed unit, we would be inspecting their food for them, just like our job states. So this was kind of over the top and ridiculous. And I knew this from talking to my recruiter before. And the instructors at, food inspection school were talking about their food inspection lives and how great it was to be a food inspector. One instructor was telling a story how his, PT, his physical training, was getting up and going golfing every morning in Hawaii. That was how he started his day, was golfing. And then he would go to the office and do his food inspection duties, right? So here I get sent to Fort Huachuca to this ridiculous Sergeant First Class who wants to treat us like, we're in the infantry. And, he really, at the end of the day, was just an alcoholic who had no morals or values. And he was just a miserable person. So he took that out on us in his unit. And then I had my immediate supervisor, and her name was Sergeant Fuller, and she was just a gigantic piece of shit. She was lazy. She abused her position. She was in a bad marriage. her husband was a piece of shit. And so she would miss work all the time and just sit at home while, we worked all day. But, just had no problem just being the walking contradiction that she was, right? Just, both of these leaders were just terrible leaders and terrible human beings. And so I just did not enjoy my time with them and under them, which was about 3 years of my military career that I had to be there working with them and for them. I did meet Sergeant Jason Becker at the time, and we hung out, and he was cool. And actually, we still maintain a friendship to this day. So shout out to my buddy Jason. He was one of the few good things that came out of my time in the Army. But I signed up to go to college and get an MBA, and I let Sergeant First Class via my NCOIC, which means non-commissioned officer in charge, know that I didn't plan on making the Army a career. That I planned on just getting my MBA while I was in the Army and getting out and doing something with that MBA. And, he didn't like that because me doing things like going to leadership school and, going TDY to learn different things and take different classes, that made him look good, right? Because that showed he was helping a soldier further his career. And because I had no interest in furthering my career, because I was using the Army, I wasn't liked. I also didn't drink. They were all drinkers. They all went out and hung out and drank. And I did my own thing when I wasn't at work, which was usually playing sports or working out at the gym or both. So I was still big into sports, intramural sports, which I had done through college as well, and weightlifting. And so those were the things I wanted to do. And so when I was at work, it just sucked. It sucked. I hated working for Sergeant First Class Via. I hated working for Sergeant Fuller. And when their time was finally up and Sergeant First Class Via left for the desert to go to Iraq, and when Sergeant Fuller got out of the Army and moved back to New Mexico, where she was from, like, those were huge reliefs off my shoulder. And then, another specialist that I work with, she was also kind of a pain in the ass. And she got out because she got pregnant and she went to have a baby. And then all of a sudden, everybody was getting out that I was working with or leaving, going to a different location. And then I suddenly found myself in charge of the unit, which was only a couple other airmen underneath me at that time. I think maybe 3 airmen underneath me at that time. So I went from being, just a food inspector dealing with the bullshit to being a corporal that was now the NCOIC in charge, which was formerly Sergeant First Class Via's job. And, things started to look on the up and up. I had gotten through most of my college degree at this time. I was reaching towards the end of getting my MBA, which is what I went to college for, to get an MBA, Master's in Business Administration, for those of you that don't know. And, all the toxic people that I couldn't stand left. The old commander that was in charge left. I don't know, it was a captain. I can't remember his name. He was kind of useless. He left. And now, I had a captain in charge who was cool. And, I really got along with her. Her name was Captain Pike. And I enjoyed working with her side by side because, I went from being someone who worked in the office at the commissary to now working at the, veterinary office, sitting in the NCOIC's desk, which was right next to the officer in charge's desk, Captain Pike. And things just changed dramatically. I changed PT. I made PT still, where we could prepare for the fitness test and we could get in better shape, but we could just do it smarter, because I knew, a lot about fitness and exercise. And the way Army does it or did it back then was they just break you. They don't care if they destroy your elbows and destroy your shoulders and destroy your back with the running and the sit-ups. They don't care. That's what, disabilities for when you get out of the Army. But I didn't want to be disabled. So I got to change physical fitness. I got to relax the unit a little bit because there was just no need for it to be treated like we were in the infantry. And, I had come to find out that Sergeant First Class Villa, who was married with 2 daughters, was sleeping with that specialist. And, oh, by the way, when she got out of the Army to have a baby, that was his baby that she was having. So, he went to Iraq to run away from his problems, which were facing his wife and 2 daughters, and then now his soldier that he had gotten pregnant with a daughter. And, he, I guess, was hoping to die in Iraq because about 2 weeks when his time was up in Iraq and he was supposed to get out, he hung himself. He committed suicide. And so, I knew that that he wasn't a good dude, but I didn't know he did that. And, there were some other people in the office, the secretary and the admin, Captain Pike, a few other civilians that worked there that were really distraught by his death. And I just felt no remorse. I mean, I just didn't like the man, couldn't stand him, thought he was a piece of shit with no morals and values. And so the fact that he hung himself, it just didn't faze me. I didn't feel bad about it. And so I didn't go to his funeral that he had at Fort Huachuca. Some people got upset with me, but I am who I am and I stick to my beliefs, and I'm not going to go pretend to mourn someone that I didn't mourn. I didn't care. I just flat out didn't care that he was dead. It was sad for his now 3 daughters that are fatherless. But he made his decisions and he made his bed, and, he had to lie in it. And that was the choice that he made, and so Sergeant Fuller, I didn't like working for her. She made my life difficult. So when she got out and she moved away, she tried to befriend me on Facebook and stuff after and be friendly with me, but I wasn't having it. I didn't like her. I didn't want to pretend to like her. She just wasn't the kind of person I would like in real life. So all that had moved on. And now I was the NCOIC in charge of, as a corporal, of a few airmen. And then, I had met someone at the commissary that I was starting to talk to. And her name was Sonia. And, it wasn't anything yet, but it was hopefully building to something. That was the way I felt at the time. And while doing that, there were other new people coming in. So there was a sergeant that came in who she outranked me. And, I had to meet her the day she arrived and greet her and welcome her to base. And when I did that, the very day that I met her and brought her to base, we hooked up. We had a sexual relationship, and just that one time though, right? And then we didn't for a little while. Other people came in. We had a certain sergeant first class come in, take over, become NCOIC. He wasn't a bad dude. I wouldn't say he was a great dude, but Sergeant B had set the bar low, so he was better than him. We had a new commander, Major Dodd, come in and take over for Captain Pike, and Captain Pike was still there, but Major Dodd was now the local officer in charge. And the unit was changing, so I got sent back to the commissary. And then, one other time while I was at the commissary, I was now a sergeant. I hooked up with that other sergeant again, but at this point, she was my supervisor, right? We were both sergeants, but she was a sergeant a month ahead of me. And because it's a small unit, they made her my supervisor because she outranked me by 1 month. She was younger than me. She had a high school education. And here I was literally just a few classes away from completing an MBA and also 7 or 8 years older than her. But she was my supervisor because that's how the military works. And so, after the second time we hooked up, I told her, I said, look, I'm starting to see someone else, and I want to see where that's going to go. So, we can't do this again. This is done. It's over. I can't do this again. And she says to me, yeah, okay, I understand. And then the very next day, she tried to write me up for being derelict of duty because she said she told me I had to report to the commissary and I had reported to the veterinary clinic, and none of that was true. None of it was true. And so obviously we're standing in front of the NCOIC and the officer in charge, and she's trying to write me up and, get me in trouble for something I didn't do. And they're standing there looking at me like, well, why would you? And I'm saying, this isn't true. This is not what happened. This isn't true. And they're going, well, why would she do this? What reason would she have to write you up and lie about this? So I had to come out with it. I had to tell the truth. And I had to say, well, because we were hooking up and, she got pissed off and upset that I said it was over. And so now she's trying to punish me. And they looked at me and they were like, are you serious? This is the truth. You're not making this up. I said, no, it's 100% to the truth. And so, they went back to her and they said, oh, this is what Sergeant Held said. Is that true? And she said, oh, yeah, it's true. We did hook up once, but we hooked up once when I first arrived and he was the NCOIC and I had just gotten here. That was the only time we ever hooked up. We didn't hook up any other time after that. So we took this all the way to my first sergeant and commander, who was a lieutenant colonel, and they were both based out of Fort Carson, Colorado. And they decided, for whatever reason, they didn't want to believe me, that they were going to believe her, this young piece of shit girl that outranked me by 1 month. All of a sudden, they decided she was telling the truth, that we only hooked up one time while I was NCOIC and she outranked me, but I had a position above her, but we didn't hook up any other time after that. So therefore, they were going to punish me and give me an Article 15 while she would get in no trouble at all. And that wasn't cool with me at all. I was irate. I already had a terrible time in the Army. I already hated the Army. The only two things I liked about the Army were me getting my MBA and me meeting my buddy, Sergeant Becker, who, I would be friends with for life. And now I was going through this situation towards the end of my Army career. And so I went to a lawyer, a JAG lawyer, and I explained the situation to him. And he was, wasn't his fault. He was very honest with me. He said, look, if if that's what the commander believes, that's what he believes. There's really nothing we can do about it. We can make a case for you, but there's no recourse. There's just nothing we can do about it. So I ended up losing my sergeant rank and getting knocked back down to specialist, and she got in trouble. And so, or she didn't get in trouble, excuse me. And so I said, look, I'm half a year of getting out of the Army. I don't want to work for a command who treats me like this. I don't want to work for a command that calls me a liar when I'm the one telling the truth. And so I don't feel comfortable. I'm in an uncomfortable situation. And I ended up going to the right people who agreed with me that I had befriended through friendships and sports and stuff like that in the medical facility. And they said, you know what, we'll help you out. So they got me out of that situation, and they got me where I spent, my last several months in the Army just hanging out at the gym, just basically, looking at IDs when people come in the gym, when they walk in. And I got to do it in, jeans and a sweatshirt or whatever, jeans and a t-shirt, whatever, depending on the weather. And I spent the last portion of my Army career basically in civilian clothes because my leadership and command was absolute trash. They were absolute pieces of shit. And, to follow up on that, my first sergeant, who was the leader of kicking people out, right? He believed if you couldn't take a PT test within a year or whatever, like he was just kicking people out left and right. And this is the same guy that joined the military in, the 80s by a judge who said you either join the military or go to jail. He had gotten in trouble, and a judge forced him to join the Army or he was going to have to go to jail. So this guy makes it up to first sergeant status. And then, he's just a real prick and a real asshole the whole way. And, so he ends up getting busted, sleeping with a captain, and he gets kicked out of the Army, and he loses all of his benefits, his 28 years of military service, his senior NCO status. He loses it all. He loses his retirement benefits. He loses everything. And I tell you what, I never felt so good about hearing someone get in trouble like that as I did when I heard that happen to him. And I don't remember his name, which is funny and ironic, right? Because I can remember the master sergeant who screwed me over when I was 20 years old, but I can't remember this first sergeant's name who screwed me over when I was in my early 30s. But I'm just glad this happened to him. And, he deserved it. And so I did my time, and I finished out my time in the Army. And as a matter of fact, I left the Army about 3 months early because, they made sure they wanted to screw me good because I wasn't still under their command, coming to work every day, reporting to them, and they were who they were. So they kicked me out 3 months early with a general under honorable conditions discharge, which is fine. It's whatever. I mean, I know I was honorable. I know I didn't do anything to deserve any of the negative stuff that happened to me while I was in the Army. Well, you might say, well, you hooked up with that girl. Yeah, but I mean, at the time, she outranked me. I genuinely had no idea that the NCOIC, who was, under her rank, but apparently over her by position, was not able to do that. I had no idea. So I didn't do that knowingly. But I do know that when we hooked up later and she was my supervisor. She was doing something wrong. She was doing something she wasn't supposed to be doing. But, and I would have never done anything to her or said anything about it if she hadn't tried to do what she did to me. So that was my Army career in a nutshell. And along the way, I had met my third wife that she would end up becoming. So I met Sonia, who was a store worker at the commissary. And, she was young, much younger than me. She had a boyfriend when I first met her. And apparently that relationship was coming to an end. And so I don't know, again, if it ended and we got together right away. I don't know if there was overlap or she was still with him and she met me. I'm not sure, but it wasn't like a jump into it, type of thing. It was, we dated for months. It wasn't like everyone else who, we met and immediately we were hooking up or whatever, or, within days hooking up. I was with her for a few months before that relationship progressed and turned into anything sexual or significant. So there was some definite overlap there where, I was seeing her, but I also had hooked up with this sergeant, but we hadn't called ourselves exclusive or a couple. As a matter of fact, she had kind of ended things with me and said she needed to be single for a while. And we weren't talking for some time. And then, she kind of texted me out of the blue one day and asked me to come see her at this event she was at. And it surprised me because I thought, we were done there. And so I did. And that was kind of what rekindled that relationship. So, during this difficult time, by the way, that I was going through while I was in the Army with the whole getting an Article 15 thing. And, this was all after the fact. And now, Sonia and I were dating. It was exclusive and it was a real relationship. And I told her I was going to get out of the Army, and she was pressuring me because she only knew her father was a, CW5, and she only knew military life. That was all she knew. She didn't know civilian life. So she was putting a lot of pressure on me, and I was going through what I was going through. She didn't like the fact that I was going to get out of the Army, even though I was going to have an MBA. And I just felt like my world was falling around me. And so this time I checked myself in to a psychiatric unit. And so I found myself again in another psychiatric unit because I couldn't handle what was happening to me in real life. Except this time I didn't threaten suicide. I didn't say I was going to kill myself. I just said that I was having thoughts of it and I wanted to get help. And so I was much less dramatic about it. And so, yeah, for a second time in my life, I was in the military, a different branch, and finding myself in a psychiatric unit because things were happening to me that I couldn't handle and I didn't know what to do. And so I went through that a second time, and I'm not going to go into detail about this second time around, but because it's just not worth detailing. It was just essentially kind of the same situation. It was 2 weeks of me talking to a psychologist and being in groups and talking about my problems. And working it out until, they felt I was good to go and to get out, until I felt I was good to go and get out. And it was only 2 weeks again. But that's what happened, except this time it didn't end my relationship. She was there waiting for me. And when I got out, she was still there. She didn't go anywhere. So that's one of the main things that led to me asking her to marry me. And for the first time, I was going to get married, even though it was my third marriage, to someone who I genuinely wanted to marry and try to live a life with and spend a life with. And so that was the plan, and that was the proposal. And that's where I will pick up in the next episode. So thanks for joining me. Thanks for listening to my podcast. If you like this podcast, please listen to the rest of them and let me know. Go to my website, brandonheld.com. Check out my blog. Leave notes on my blog. Give me episode ideas, things you'd like to hear, or just tell me, you didn't like it and why. Tell me what you think could be better. I'm open to hearing all of it. So just go to brandonheld.com.